Norway isn't as perfect as it seems. The war in Ukraine and Iran substantially boosted Norway's sovereign wealth fund, adding well over $600 billion in just 3 years. They now have over $2 trillion in their national savings account, or well over $370,000 per person. But this vast offshore wealth distorts an economic reality. This sector employs only a fraction of the workforce, while the mainland economy is struggling. Their productivity growth has decreased over past decades, and their government spends more than any other country in the world, in part to fund its generous welfare state, which, granted, is almost nowhere as good as in Norway. If you have a child, you'll get almost a full year of paid leave. If you fall ill, the government helps pay 100% of your salary, which might partly explain why absences due to sickness are by far the highest in the developed world. No other government pays as much relative to the size of their economy on sickness and disability. And these issues are now sparking debates that had once felt unthinkable. This is Norway's economic dilemma with hindsight. Norway is a very interesting case study. They transformed from being a nation of sailors, loggers and fishermen to having seemingly endless amounts of money. That's coming from those offshore oil fields, and they use these revenues to build one of the most equal, prosperous and successful societies in human history. But the problems that Norway is currently facing cannot simply be solved by spending more money, and that places Norway at a historic crossroads. That's why in this video I would like to look at why and how the Norwegian model is currently hitting a wall and what can be done about it. Let's start at the beginning. Norway's landscape is breathtaking, but historically it had been an economic trap. Only 3% of the land is suitable for farming. The rest is dominated by steep mountains, fjords, and a brutal northern climate. At the start of the 20th century, they didn't have large heavy industries like Germany or vast financial networks like Britain. Instead, their economy relied on what people could harvest from the environment: fish, timber, and shipping. Yet this model was remarkably successful. They built a prosperous, highly developed society rooted in trust and cooperation. Norwegian leaders constantly faced difficult choices because resources were always finite, but they were careful and disciplined until everything changed. Christmas Eve, 1969. The Norwegian government received a phone call that would change the nation forever. Out in the North Sea, the drilling rig Ocean Viking had been battling severe winter storms. Weeks earlier, they had found oil, but when geologists studied the samples, they couldn't believe their eyes. They had just discovered one of the largest offshore oil fields in human history. Almost overnight, the country changed forever. The old rules of scarcity were over, but that culture remained. As massive wealth started flooding in from these offshore oil fields, the government decided to invest these revenues into a state fund. This cash gradually started adding up, and strict fiscal rules kept successive governments from taking too much out of this fund. Instead, they committed to a staggering promise. Citizens nationwide, whether they lived in remote isolated fjords or high up in the Arctic Circle, should receive the exact same high-quality infrastructure, schools and healthcare as those who are living in Oslo. And they delivered on that promise. Oil fundamentally changed how the country worked. This historic oil wealth led to more public spending, and this required having a larger state. As social protections expanded, there were more beneficiaries, like students, pensioners, and government workers. The state expanded so much that now nearly 1 in every 3 people is working directly for the state. That's far above even its Scandinavian neighbors, and it's nearly twice as high as the average for developed countries. But slowly, a structural trap emerged. This system led to fewer economic reforms, which led to more public spending. And while Norway had no shortage of those funds, this created a deep financial dependence on its oil wealth. This feedback loop emerged in the early 2000s, but it became seriously problematic in recent years. Now, the offshore economy is booming, but Norway's mainland economy is showing real signs of trouble ahead. I now want to get into those problems of Norway's mainland economy, and while having a big government and a big welfare state are part of the problem, the real explanation is much more interesting. But first, a quick sponsored message. In my everyday life, I use AI practically for everything. I track the food that I eat, the workouts that I do. And I'm raising 2 young kids. The youngest is just 10 months old, which means that he's going through a lot of changes right now. And I always consult chatbots to inform myself properly. So if you have followed my channel for a while, you know that I deeply care about privacy. And these chatbots are a concern of mine. I feed them a lot of personal information about me, about my marriage, and about my kids. And all that data is stored somewhere. And these are mostly American companies. And I'm not sure if that could ever be used against me. And that is a problem that today's sponsor is trying to fix. Lumo is an AI assistant that was specifically designed to place your privacy front and center. It does everything that you expect from an AI chatbot, but without harvesting your data or keeping logs. So imagine if there's a data leak and all that personal information about you ends up in the hands of a bad actor. That could very convincingly be used to steal your identity, and that could do a world of harm. But there's no harm in keeping an open mind. Lumo is based in Switzerland. It is the European alternative for big tech with a main focus on privacy. Click the link in the pinned comment or description to give it a try. It is absolutely free. Now, let's go back to the video. Norway is often split into 2. You have the offshore economy, which handles oil and gas, and you have the mainland economy, which is where Norwegians actually live and work. On paper, life in that mainland economy looks close to perfect. Take homeownership, which sits at a staggering 79%, comfortably beating both the EU and the US. Poverty is kept at a remarkable 8%, while homelessness is practically non-existent. Even the labor market seems remarkably stable, with unemployment sitting below the EU average and just above the US average. Education is free, and out-of-pocket healthcare expenses are kept low. But despite Norway's massive oil wealth, the government takes a substantial cut of workers' salaries. Workers pay 37% in combined income taxes and social contributions. That's below the EU average, but it is significantly above the US. To understand what is going on underneath all of this, you have to look past the surface, because if you take away Norway's vast petroleum wealth, a completely different picture of their economy emerges.
Financial markets from Asia to Europe are doing their utmost to prevent Monday from turning from dark to black.
The financial crisis marked a turning point. This is Norway's productivity growth. During the 2008 crash, the line plunges to almost -4%. And in the subsequent decades, it struggled to stay even above zero. Since that market crash, Norway's productivity growth has been amongst the lowest in the entire developed world, and far behind other countries in Scandinavia. In a normal country, an efficiency crisis like this would trigger an immediate national emergency. Governments would be forced to make hard reforms or to limit bureaucracy, but Norway isn't a normal country. They now have this massive sovereign wealth fund, which is the largest in the world by a wide margin, and politicians have to follow strict fiscal rules. On any given year, they cannot take out more than 3% of its market value, but that still equals a tremendous sum of money that they can invest in social protections and welfare. Norway's government now spends a truly remarkable amount of money on keeping this entire system afloat. They spend over 60% of Norway's mainland GDP each year to fund these public services, which is even high for Scandinavian standards. It's not like that pension fund is being depleted. It just grew so large that even taking a small percentage out of this fund represented a massive inflow of cash. And since 2008, the mainland economy was slowing down, which meant that the state was becoming increasingly dependent on cash coming out of this fund. In 2025, the share of total spending by the government had risen sharply to 24%. This was up from just 3% in 2001. But since that market crash in 2008, the mainland economy has been slowing down. Their productivity growth has stalled, which means that Norway's government is currently increasingly dependent on that state fund to cover the bill. Each year, the budget deficits of Norway's mainland economy are rising. In 2026, it reached a record of 13% per year, and this gap is covered by state subsidies. Subsidies in Norway are high, and they are rising. The mainland economy is showing real, structural problems, but the government treated this as a cash flow problem. Where budgets fell short, they provided subsidies. This didn't solve the underlying structural problems, which was that their economy was becoming less efficient. But that was just the start. The oil boom created an even larger smokescreen.
After months of preparations, the Russian President Vladimir Putin has launched a major military operation against Ukraine.
The invasion of Ukraine strongly boosted Norway's gas exports.
The US and Israel launched coordinated airstrikes right across Iran.
The closure of the Strait of Hormuz did the same for Norway's oil exports.
Crude oil prices hitting their highest level since the start of the Ukraine war some 4 years ago.
Hitting that triple-digit level that we saw earlier this week for the first time since this conflict started.
This led to those record-shattering years for Norway's sovereign wealth fund. But that created a wealth that everyday people barely felt. Norway's currency was also weakening, which increased the cost of imports, groceries, and housing. People's salaries barely moved, while the cost of living increased sharply. The country was becoming infinitely richer on paper, but Norway's mainland economy faced many of the same challenges as in other parts of the West. The workforce is aging. Fewer workers are now paying for more retirees, and more people were calling in sick. This is where Norway is different. The current level of sick leave support is very generous, often providing 100% of your salary. Many people in Norway defend these policies. They are built on a deeply held belief that no one should be financially punished for becoming ill. But if the state and your employer pay 100% of your salary while being sick, there's very little incentive to go back to work. In Norway, absences due to sickness and disability are by far the highest in the developed world. In developed countries, workers lose on average about 2.5 days per year. In Norway, that's nearly 6. That offshore wealth is great for building new roads, bridges, and hospitals. It can be used to weather economic crises, but you cannot buy economic efficiency, and you cannot use these funds to change the laws of economics. The debate has now burst into the open.
Og det kjempeviktig for Norge at vi får færre på trygd, flere på jobb.
Norway's government is taking center stage.
Så det jo ikke alltid sånn at jo mer penger vi bruker på velferd, jo mer får vi igjen.
Norway now finds itself at a historic crossroads. Ever when that big oil started flowing, it was often used to some extent to postpone making difficult economic decisions. But that is now changing.
They are now openly discussing choices that were once unthinkable. Has the government become too big? Should it become harder to live on welfare? Their government has grown so large that it employs 1 in every 3 people, competing with private industries for labor, while labor shortages are worsening. These are problems that money alone cannot solve. It is easy to look at this and assume that Norway's model is failing, but this misses a deeper truth. Norway has been here before. Long before oil was ever discovered, the Norwegian people had already built a highly successful democratic society. They faced a scarcity of resources, which they managed with strict fiscal discipline. Then came the era of abundance. They managed their oil with that same fiscal discipline. They built a framework designed to ensure that the country's natural resources would benefit the whole of society, rather than just a wealthy few. Now, the challenge has changed. The task is no longer to survive scarcity or to manage abundance, but to find a balance between the two. The daily reality for citizens is defined by high prices, persistent inflation, home prices that are spiraling out of control, and, ironically, high energy prices. Norway's challenge is surprisingly simple. Their mainland economy stopped generating enough growth to keep up with an expanding welfare state. Instead of making difficult reforms, successive governments relied on its extraordinary oil wealth. This bought them time, but it also made the mainland economy increasingly dependent on oil.
So researching and producing videos like these is a lot of fun, but also a lot of hard work, which is why I'm gonna take a short summer break. And just in case you didn't know already, I recently started a second YouTube channel, which is currently live, and you can check it out. The channel is called C2 Center, and there's a number of videos already online that you can binge watch if you're ever bored. Thank you for watching until the very end of this video, and here are 2 more videos that you can consider for your next watch.